We've come to 2 o'clock for the afternoon session. Thanks for those of you who stayed around for the lunchtime lecture. That was excellent presentation from Lyndall at the Black Dog Institute. But also thank you for those of you who have been away and have now come back and are returning for the afternoon session. So just to be clear, it's been a long day. I think many of you will have been with us most of the day. Maybe some of you are just dropping in for the first time. We do have on the program 2 sessions this afternoon. We very deliberately didn't include any speakers in the final session because we just wanted to leave that open to see whether there was a need or an appetite for further discussion. We're very aware that whilst Zoom allows us to chat away on the chat box, unlike real events, you don't get as much opportunity to sort of talk face to face with people. And we're not clear, having not run many of these events online before, what people want and what people need. So we've left that space after about 3:30 open. Yesterday when we ran a short session, we found that it was a good half an hour when people wanted to stick around and chat, but not a whole sort of 90 minutes. But we'll keep the room open for 90 minutes if that's what the community wants, and if there's stuff you want to share and explore, that's great. But you know, if you feel you've got everything you need today, or just had enough of Zoom, or happen to have busy lives and other things to do as well, and there's not an appetite for it, well, we'll bring the session to a close around about 3:30. But we'll respond to your needs. So I'm going to start my video so make it official. You're not just hearing my voice like some kind of ABC continuity announcer. I'm back in the room. The observant of you will have noticed that I'm now sitting down, not standing. And I'm in a different room. It looks like the same background, but I'm in a room with more Queensland sunshine, which means I get this little sort of white thing going around the cutout. So I apologize. I apologize for that, but I don't apologize for the fact that I live in Queensland and I'm enjoying the sunny sunshine. So we've got 4 speakers today, this afternoon. I'm going to check on my itinerary to just confirm. Lynn, could you just confirm in my chat box the order that we agreed for the speakers, because I realize I don't have it just in front of me. And this session is about sharing best practice across primary health networks. And to remind the speakers as well, just in case, oh, actually Mick's given it. Is that the actual order though, Mick? We agreed? I think it.
I'm not sure. It's from the website.
That's what I gave you. Yeah, just because it's on the website doesn't mean to say we've got it absolutely right. I'm just waiting for Lynn to confirm. But Ray, were you expecting to go first? You were. So I'm going to go to Ray and I'll just double check the rest of the order and get out of the way. I've only met Ray briefly. He clearly has more to tell us than 10 minutes will allow. So I'm going to get out of the get out of the way and let Ray do it. He's from Northern Queensland, PHN, and he's been leading the project there with targeting veteran communities. And Ray, thanks for being here. I'm looking forward to your presentation. Look out in your chat box. I'll be sending you a message in about 10 minutes to let you know it's getting close to your time. Thanks, Ray.
Thanks very much, Glenn, and thanks very much, everyone, for the opportunity. First of all, I'd also like to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders as the custodians of our land and recognise where we meet, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to recognise those with us with lived experience in the room, and in particular, given what I'm going to be talking about today, which goes around veteran suicide, I'd also like to acknowledge the veterans and those in the defence community who may be with us today as well. Our focus, we're one of the 12 national trial sites. It's interesting, Lyndall spoke about trial and even the language around trial. We took a very conscious decision 2.5 years ago to ditch the word trial. We renamed this beast called the ex-ADF and Veterans and Families Suicide Prevention Trial Townsville. We ditched that and called it Operation Compass. For veterans, that was a kind of meaningful thing. With a compass, you navigate. You navigate out to a point, you come back into a kind of safe point. We renamed it and we wanted to get away from trial. The problem with a trial is we often, with our experience, you'd write a trial report, people would read it, throw it in the bin. Again, we wanted to get away from trial. And we began with the end in mind. And the end in mind was really about what's going to endure in this thing. We knew connection was important. How can we endure and make sure that we sustain this and keep it going? So 2.5 years on, that's where we're at. But let's talk a little bit about veterans. And it's mostly, veterans, of course, are male and female veterans. And in our country, there's about 300,000 veterans. They're in every town and community and little spot throughout our country. They're in all your communities. In Townsville, out of a regional centre of 200,000, 20% are in the defence community here, 20%. That's between serving people and ex-people. And in the North Queensland community, where the Northern Queensland Primary Health Network is, 1 in 7 are veterans. That's quite significant. So for us, one of the biggest challenges was, and I might say by way of one-liner introduction, I'm not a clinician. And it's interesting today hearing clinicians and non-clinicians speak. We're using the lifespan model. I'm a non-clinician, I'm a veteran, okay? So it's kind of maybe an interesting perspective. For us, the challenge was, how do we engage with people who are difficult to get to? Those veterans, and mostly men, but some females, who are living in a cave. I lived in a cave figuratively at one stage a few years ago. How do we get to those people? How do we get to younger veterans, older veterans? There's also a misconception in our country that veterans are grey-haired people like me and older Second World War veterans. Veterans can be from 18 years old. They get into the service, they might be injured, get out pretty quickly, up to 100 years old at the moment. Mostly men, some women, but also that includes their kids, which would be boys as well. So how do we get to those people and connect? It's interesting, within the service, and you might not be aware of this, within our ADF, suicide rates are lower than the rest of the community, lower. There's an issue of suicide, obviously, within the Defence Force, but the rates are lower. Well, why is that? We looked at it in the early, our hypothesis was this. We know that when you're in the ADF, and I was in it for 27 years, there's a sense of purpose, there's a mission. You work together, you share good times, bad times. In the end, you would share your last bit of food together. You're prepared to lay down your life for your fellow man. Very close-knit, incredible connection. When we step out of the ADF, and sometimes that's without a great deal of formality, you go out the front gate, hand in your ID card and get one of those green health cards that I always forget the name of, Medicare. The connection for some, or the reconnection back in the community, is a real challenge, transition. Within the veteran community, those stats turn around from lower than the rest of the community to significantly higher. For young veterans, about 2.2 up to 2.5 times the rate of suicide compared to their counterparts in the community. That spreads throughout those age zones. As kind of Lyndall pointed out before, that's also similar. There's also a significant issue for older veterans. What we wanted to do, and we adopted the lifespan model, we've run 6 significant campaigns, 30-odd projects, including, looking at the evidence-based programs. As a non-clinician, one of the first things I asked was, if we keep doing these evidence-based programs around the world, why aren't things changing? So what I really want to share with you is a couple of the innovative things we've done, which we think we're starting to see an impact, in veteran behaviour in engaging. We've also worked we had a really well-established Townsville Suicide Prevention Network. We've got some very good services in Townsville. One of the issues is, how do you connect all that up? How do people get to where they need to be at the right time? And those are similar issues for all of you, I'm sure. We've done this 3-year trial, those three campaigns, but what's really, the ones that we've really got some significant value out of is one called the Check Your Mates campaign. We know that around Christmas time, Anzac Day, Remembrance Day, they're challenging times for people. We're all aware of the Are You OK campaign. Check Your Mates was a further challenge to veterans. We go back to our kind of teamwork. What we did was we challenged every veteran to check in on 5 mates by connecting, having a yarn and motivating them to act. Connect, yarn, motivate, check your mates. we knew 4 out of 5 of them would probably be doing pretty well. We would then get those 4 out of 5 to check in on another 5 mates. When a mate wasn't doing well, we gave them the support to, lean on my shoulder, get some informal help, or put them in the direction of services. That Check Your Mates campaign 2 Christmases ago started with a small group of people, reached a couple of thousand. In the last 2.5 years now, we've had 2.5 million social engagements with that Check Your Mates campaign. We took on a PR company. We filmed veterans and their families talking about the issues and the importance of checking on your mates. This last Anzac Day, because of COVID, we got individuals to do selfie kind of campaigns. Even that campaign engaged 250,000 people. 3,000, our traffic to our website went up 87%. We had 2,000 people check in on how to check their mates. We had 200 reach out to find out how they get support. We know that that's been making a significant difference. As well as the Check Your Mates, we've also done some community grants. We had advice early on that said, oh, hang on, that's really not around suicide prevention. Is that what you should be doing in the trial? What we wanted to do was go out and engage more people. We've had 20 different community grants over the last couple of years. Small grants up to $25,000, some are small, $6,000. In those grants, we did things like having small groups of veterans from a psychiatric clinic here who are getting support, go out and help farmers. We've done that 6 times. And what's in helping the farmers, of course, those veterans ended up helping themselves a fair bit. Virtually none of them have gone back into that intensive care. We had a program called Health Cycles, which was veterans cycling together indoors. It wasn't about the cycling. It was about veterans getting together in the community afterwards, talking, chatting, reconnecting back within their community. We also had an elderly group of veterans go out and deliver a magazine called The Bugle to veterans over 85. We know that has saved lives. Not the magazine, not the content of the magazine, it's the fact that other younger veterans went out, sat with an older veteran for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, had a yarn, had a brew and had a chat. That has changed lives for both the older veterans and the younger veterans. So really, for us, we've tried we've tried QPR and those things. Some of those things have been successful for us. I think what the great strength of ours has been an incredibly connected community, had senior members of the community involved in this from the start. We knew what the end in mind was. We're now putting a huge effort into how we transfer this work back into our Open Arms network, back into DVA, the department. And in Townsville, there's one of the 6 veteran wellbeing centres being set up called the Oasis in Townsville. And a lot of the learnings we've got from what we've been doing will transfer into that organisation to help our community. And we'll then spread that out. A lot of those learnings will go out to the rest of the country. One of the clinical things we've done is we've created a veteran health pathways for GP. That will be trialled in Townsville first, then we'll go out to the rest of the country. There's been many more examples, but what I really appreciated this morning and what I'd say to anyone here is you don't need a PHN. I mean, it's handy, we've had some resources to do it, but what we need to be doing is reinforcing success at the local level. We've heard these wonderful little projects throughout our country at the moment. Reinforce success. That's all I have.
Great. Thanks, Ray. And it's not all you have, that's gold. And yeah, there's that one take-home message that while there isn't one single thing that's working, that concerted local grassroots up effort is fundamentally important for every community attempting to tackle this issue. So a really good example of how you in your region, targeting your specific community, are approaching that, and a lesson to be learned for lots of people. I hope you'd be good to stick around and join us in the broader conversation. So 2 things from me. Firstly, just a quick shout out to this is like the owner of the car registration plate 567. Is if Kim Holland, our our fourth speaker. If Kim Holland is in the house and has named himself something different rather than Kim Mulholland, Kim, just send us a message either in the chat box to everyone or directly, so we know where to find you. And I'll come now to our second speaker in this session, which is Aden Hemmerling. So Aden's not someone that I've actually met in person, but when we reached out to West Victoria PHN, as I mentioned this morning, we had a really great conversation there with Mick Stoof, who was in the first session, and Sam McIntosh, who some of you may know. And Sam gave us a whole host of different localized projects and individuals working in that area who she strongly recommended we spoke to. And one of them was Aden. And Aden and I had a really good yarn, and it was really clear that also Aden was another of those people that we could give an hour to, and he wouldn't be able to share all his knowledge. And so we've asked him instead to condense as much of his knowledge as he can down into 10 minutes. And Aden has a particular focus on working with LGBTI communities. So we're really looking forward to hearing Aden's story and the work that he's been up to with the communities he's focused on in his local area. Thanks for being here, Aden. We just need to unmute you. There you
Hi,
go.
Glenn. Thank you.
Hey, Aden.
How are you going? Nice to speak to you. So I guess today I'll be speaking about my role within the STEPMI program. STEPMI is a PHN-funded program, primarily for people with enduring and ongoing mental health. It originally was taken over approximately 2 years ago. It used to be the Mental Health Nurse Incentive Program, and now that has been split up into various areas across the western region of Victoria. My role within that program is a peer support worker with a background with working in the community health sector for a numerous number of years. I guess the primary focus of the STEPMI program is it's a clinical coordination team. So within our program at Neami National, we have a psychologist, a clinical lead, we have myself as a peer worker, and then we have a mental health social worker. I guess we've been working within the program. I think the benefits of having a coordinated approach to the program is that we are able to work in collaboration with lots of other services. The main eligibility criteria is a person has an ongoing and enduring mental health, that they have been clinically engaged with services in the past 12 months, and reside within the Western region, which is my area, is the Geelong region. We service down to the Otways up to Geelong. So it's quite a huge catchment area. Within the program itself, I think one of the main priorities is actually for myself as a peer worker and working in collaboration with a lot of clinical workers, is that what we've been able to do is really collaborate together to get a better understanding of how we can better support people who are at high risk. So we have a lot of people present with suicidal ideation. They may have just been case managed within the local clinical services. And we've also been able to work with the clinical services in the Geelong region to really get them to better understand that we aren't, I guess what you in some ways can happen is people get referred on when they're not necessarily ready to be referred on. So I guess my role within that is to really hear people and then also advocate on their behalf in relation to it may be around their medications, it may be around how they're feeling in relation to their previous treatment, how they're being case managed, and how we can actually provide them a service where they feel as though they're actually being heard. So in that, we do utilise clinical assessments, etc. which we, instead of making assumptions of a consumer's journey, what we do is we actually ask them. What you can tend to find with some services is that a consumer might present and they might be extremely unwell, and then the automatic response is to make an assumption of what that person is actually experiencing. Instead, what we try to do within the STEPMI program is actually ensure that they're ready, that they're actually ready to engage with the service, that there isn't a too high expectation on them, because sometimes what can happen is we say, okay, let's set some goals, etc. And for some consumers, that isn't even realistic at that point in time. So what we try to do is we try to surround them within the team. So I can give you an example, as if someone was engaging with me at first, I got to know them a little bit, got to hear their actual story and what their needs are, then I can assess how I can best support that person with their journey. In doing that is sometimes that I may need extra support from one of my clinical lead, and the consumer and I together can go along and have a conversation with the clinical lead around their medications. It might be around their physical health. It may be around other services that we can support the consumer to engage with. It may be that we need to have a conversation with a GP to discuss their medical treatment. It may be that they may need more intensive trauma-informed services, such as a sexual assault crisis type intervention. So in saying that, that is how we support a person, and the program is beneficial because it's actually ongoing. So we can see a consumer up to 12 months, and then we will do an assessment at the end of the 12 months to, I guess, see where the consumer feels that they're at, and then reassess whether or not they may need to stay on within the program for another certain period of time. Then during that process, what we'll do is we'll reassess every 3 months, just to see how they're travelling, where they feel they're at. And then what we'll do is we'll support them to engage with a more, I guess, depending on where they are in their recovery, it may be a more psychosocial type service where they can get the day-to-day support in building on their recovery. Within the program, what we've found is that we've had a lot of LGBTIQ plus people engage with the STEPMI program. So I personally identify as a gay man and have found it extremely interesting that there is quite a high percentage of LGBTI consumers engaging within the STEPMI program. In saying this, that, you know, for me personally, that means that people within my community are actually struggling quite significantly, and which the statistics show that the suicidal rate for the LGBTI community is 3 to 6 times higher than a heteronormative community. So we've actively seen this as an area that we can improve and continue to improve and to support consumers. We're building links continuously with local LGBTI services such as Wellways, and then also linking in with other services such as the Rainbow Pride Centre in Melbourne, Vaughan Harbour Community Health, and other vital services in the area. I guess for me personally, and I guess in relation to the STEPMI program, I really feel that the way of collaborating with services and really working together to hear a person is what I'm really wanting to emphasise with, I guess, all of you today as different practitioners, etc. Is I think sometimes the hardest thing for a consumer is actually to front up, is to actually share that part of themselves, no matter their background. I think takes a lot to engage with a service, and I know myself as a survivor of abuse, is that it actually takes a lot to share a story, and then to feel when you're actually heard, it is such a relief. And I think that is what can happen sometimes when people engage with services, is they don't feel heard. And then what happens, or what can happen, is the assumption is that they're too unwell or that they're difficult. And then what we can see is a handballing effect, where consumers get handballed from service to service because of their behaviours, or because a worker feels that they can't manage those behaviours. Whereas I feel if we can actually stop for a moment and put ourselves in their shoes, or and ask them, what is it that you actually need at this point in time, instead of making an assumption about their diagnosis or what their prognosis might be, is actually hearing their story. Sorry about that, I was really nervous, so I hope that was helpful, Glenn. If there's any other questions at the end, I'm happy to answer them if I missed anything.
Aden, it was excellent. I think you covered a lot of territory in a short amount of time. Thank you so much for being here. And I know how nerve-wracking it can be, especially when you can't feel the feedback from this room of silent faces, right?
There's no room of people to look at. It's really hard.
Right, yeah. How do you tell? How do you tell how they're doing? But I found that really useful and engaging. I think, you know, we spend a lot of time, and understandably so, we spend a lot of time talking about how do we get, you know, men, but people to get help, you know, and how do we encourage men to get help? How do we raise awareness that men need to get help and the services that men can get help from? We don't spend as much time, it seems, in the broader conversation about suicide, focusing on the process of giving help, and how, you know, giving help is more than just a quick conversation. It's long, it's complex, it's a long-term commitment. And I think what you've really shined upon there is that complexity, and that challenge we have of actually, you know, we say suicide is a complex problem, and of course it is, but then we need to simplify it enough in order that we can take action. But then our approach needs to be sophisticated enough that we don't miss out on the nuances of what each individual needs. That's that person-centered approach. That's that no wrong door approach, that ideally wherever a suicidal person, or potentially suicidal person, shows up in the system, that it isn't the wrong door, that they're able to get the right support and the right ongoing support, or get passed on to someone who can help them. And that's the challenge, and clearly that's the type of challenge that you're wrestling with for the people that you've been working with. So lots of learning there for whatever community of men we're targeting. Thanks for sharing it. So for those of you who have sort of, like, you know, slight anxiety about these things, Kim's in the house, so you can relax. We've got Kim. We've found him. He's made his way online, and Kim will be speaking in about 10 minutes or so. But first, I'm going to hand over to Naomi. Naomi, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and take your 10 minutes to share with us the work that you're doing in your region.
Thank you so much, everyone. So my name is Naomi Petty, and I'm a Program Officer at the Darley Downs Primary Health Network. I'm going to share my screen with you. Bear with me. Can you all see that okay? Is that a yes?
Yeah, looking good.
Okay, great. Before I start, I'd just like to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we work and meet today, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge those people in this meeting today with a lived experience, and acknowledge all the great work that's been done around the nation, and the passion that we all share as a group today. I'm actually going to kick off my presentation with a short video clip. So I'm going to take Mick's advice here and actually flick to the internet, except I can't see it now. and play it directly through here. So hopefully you can all hear this nicely. So this is Walkabout Barber. It's one of the initiatives that we have funded in our region. It was delivered by Gundia, and they've showcased the initiative so beautifully through this video clip. So I'm going to share it with you now. It goes for about 6 minutes.
I'm not playing the video. Anyone else?
Hi, Naomi.
Yes.
Just to click over to the video screen.
Yeah, but what great music accompanying your
Oh,
slide.
okay.
Yeah.
New share. Okay, try this. Can you see that now?
That's it.
Okay, I'll start.
My name's Brian Dowd. I'm from Walkabout Barber. I'm the owner and founder. Our Walkabout Barber movement is all about providing fresh cuts for the community, but also getting, especially men, in the chair, and men not only feeling fresh on the outside, but having a good conversation and feeling fresh on the inside. So I'm a trauma specialist by trade, and what we try to do and try to provide in the trailer is we try to provide an experience where men can get in, they can let their guard down, they can have a chat. Even young men, young boys, who find it difficult, be able to get in, have a chat, talk to us about what's going on in their lives. If they've got any questions, they can bounce them off of us. So, the trailer in itself, it's more than just a barber trailer. It's a mobile healing space, and we're trying to take it out to as many communities as we can, so those communities get the benefit of what we do, and and hopefully inspire the younger generation to do something similar in their journey.
My name is Marsha Dodd. I'm the Dolby Clinic Manager here at Gundia Health Services. I'm a proud Woolly woman from Central Queensland. I guess today's session with the Walkabout Barber, it's good for our community because it's created a safe place for our men to talk about their feelings and what they're going through at the moment, and to learn about the services we have available to them to help them along their way and along their journey. With the support of Leonie as our social emotional well-being worker and the clinic staff we've got on board, I think we're leaning towards sort of helping our men feel safe to be able to come to Gundia to allow us to help them in any way we can, basically. I think today's Walkabout Barber is a great initiative, and I'm looking forward to seeing the outcomes that we're going to get from it, and hopefully we can help these men along their way and along their journey.
Hi, I'm Leonie. I'm a social emotional wellbeing worker at Gundia. My children identify as Wiradjuri people, and they are third generation of Stolen Gem. From the Walkabout Barber, which was trying to create a safe space for men to talk in regards to men's health issues and men's business. But from there, we hope that the flow on, and it is a flow on. We've also got men's and women's groups organised for the next 2 years. So people who have completed the Walkabout Barber, they will be definitely invited to do the follow-on program with the men's program next year. We already have a women's group up and running, so we'll already have women identified for the women's one, and that will be held next year, and the flow on from that will be that we can continue those programs on into the 2020-2021 period. That means that it's just not going to be we come, run a program, run away. It means that we can offer a continual support to our communities, the communities of Oakey, Dalby and Tara for the next 3 years. And this is a long-term commitment where we can follow through our commitment to be supporting our people within our communities and getting them the help and the support and services that they need.
Hello?
Okay, I'm going to share my screen again to my presentation. So I hope you all enjoyed that. Just to give you a little bit of background information, so Walkabout Barber, as you may have heard, is a mobile barber trauma and recovery service. It's designed to provide a safe space for cuts, cultural connections and conversations about mental health. The founder, Brian Dowd, is in fact a suicide survivor himself. He's an Aboriginal barber and a trauma specialist. And this service, Walkabout Barber, was delivered by Gundia in November last year across 3 of our regional locations, Dalby, Tara, Chinchilla, located in our Western Downs LGA or local government area. And the key element, I think, is that it's Aboriginal people talking to Aboriginal people. It's a lived and shared experience that makes the program so great. We had 117 male participants. So some of the outcomes, the response was very good with lots of positive feedback from almost all the participants. It was indicated that there was a strong need for men to be able to connect with other men and talk about men's business. And Gundia received a lot of praise about the quality of the service. For some, this was their first experience of talking to other men about their perceived problem. And having culturally appropriate programs specifically targeting men's yarning on a regular basis is vital to improving and maintaining the mental health and wellbeing of men. And community consultation is the key. Fortunately, we had some additional awareness raising and promotion through the Dalby Herald, which was great. And how did we come about this? Well, the procurement process was such that it was a closed tender approach. I directly contacted and liaised with our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health services. And we spoke about the importance of having an outcome-focused initiative, having local footprint so that we could effectively commission services across our region. Most importantly though, that it was community-led. The success comes from the local Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health services taking the lead and them determining and deciding on what their community needs. We talked about the key guidelines in terms of the Department of Health guidance material and focused on ensuring that we were strengthening referral pathways from hospital health services, community, social services, GPs, that there was opportunity for the participant to refer themselves or their family or carers to refer. And there's an important component of case management, making sure that they were linking the individuals in with other appropriate services, and recognising the importance of timely follow-up. And we built this into their KPIs, particularly in recognition for those 7 days post any suicide attempt as being the most high risk for someone to reattempt. So it's a very innovative initiative, and it's based on addressing the social determinants of health. We really wanted to try and tackle the stigma and enhance help-seeking behaviour and improve health literacy, but it also needed to include some therapeutic techniques. What I really notice about Gundia and their services is that they're very skill-based and recreational oriented. They have choir, cooking, spear making, weaving, drumming, rock climbing, raft building, kayaking, things that provide these young men with a sense of purpose and identity, things that help them to re-establish that sense of belonging. They're very educational, vocational based activities that help the young men to have the confidence to enter the workforce or to re-enter the workforce. And there's definitely a strong connection to country. There were some other service models that they proposed, and we'll look to do these in the future. So some healing camps for both men and women, a range of group-based trauma-informed workshops, and we also recognise the importance of upskilling our community and workforce through mental health first aid training. Of course, COVID-19 came upon us all, and we had quite lengthy discussions with all of our service providers around how they could appropriately adapt services, what were the emerging trends and the needs of the community right now to help them through such a crisis. So we will look to offer the Find Culture Healing Camp in the near future, now that we've seen an easing of restrictions. Gundia are really innovative too. They're looking at things like providing personal iPads that they can use for a multi-purpose, so they can obtain the vital signs, and that feeds into their data. But also it's an avenue for people to access mental health apps. They've delivered a whole range of care hampers to people across the region, and they're undertaking wellbeing checks. So my take-home message is that we really need to listen to the community, and this is how we achieve better outcomes. Any questions?
We'll take a quick question now. If anyone's got one, then we'll come back to you after Kim's talk. Anyone got a quick question for Naomi?
Yeah, Glenn. Andrew. Can you
yes,
hear?
Andrew?
Yeah.
Hi, Andrew.
Hi. Look, I had about 6 months last year as a social and emotional wellbeing counsellor in the community, and I found one of the really crucial factors was literacy, and also the ability for someone to prepare court reports and advocate when men were at high risk. I found that men returning after attempts were treated with the same disregard that our services treat non-Aboriginal men. The literacy, I found, if I could get men engaged with improving their literacy, the risk disappeared.
So I just lost you at the end there, Andrew. I just didn't quite catch that last bit.
Sorry, it's just that I found that literacy, improving men's literacy and the ability to advocate in court situations for men were vital, particularly in remote communities.
Thanks. Sounds more like an observation than the question, Naomi, but thank you for that contribution, Andrew. We'll come back for questions after. Got your big take home? Involve the community.
Absolutely, co-design, community-led.
Yeah, and I posted in the chat box there's a real long, if this was just one aspect of what was going on there, but there's a really long history of barbers being used as a point of engagement with men in the men's health sector. not just with suicide prevention, but around things like blood pressure checks and things like this. Worth having a look at some of the links we've posted there if people are interested in that. And in terms of the mental health space, the Lions Collective, Lions Barbershop Collective in the UK is doing some really interesting work in terms of spreading that idea around barbers across the country. And of course, it wasn't just about barbers. What you shared with us, it was about that community involvement piece. So yeah, thanks very much. So we're gonna we've been down in Tasmania today. We've been over to WA and down in Victoria, and we've been around South Australia, New South Wales, and Queensland. We're gonna finish up in the Northern Territory. What better place to conclude? So. Kim, I hope you can share your mic's live now and you're able to join us. I think you're on mute at the moment. But
Hello.
There's Kim Mulholland. So I'm going to hand over to Kim Mulholland, who's been doing work with the Northern Territory PHN, and he'll tell us who he is and what he's been up to. All yours, Kim.
Okay, yes. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for having me here. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the Larrakia people as the traditional custodians of the land at which I'm on at the moment as we meet here today through this virtual platform. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners and elders of all of the countries and nations that each of us individuals come here and arrive together online and where we come from. So I'd like to pay my respects to those artists, elders, past and present, and acknowledge the rich contributions that have been made specifically to this Darwin community, of which I'll be speaking about a very unique and localized approach to suicide prevention, which has had the great aim and ambition of capturing the values and priorities of our local Aboriginal community here. So I'd like to pay a deep respect to all those contributors and all those rich contributions from the community. I'd like to also acknowledge those individuals and families of individuals who have a lived experience with mental health illness or suicide. And I'd like to acknowledge your profound wisdom and importance in this space. So thank you. So today, everybody, I'll be talking about a project and an approach that was taken here in Darwin, Northern Territory, which was a project or an activity of the National Suicide Prevention Trial. So unfortunately, as I had not been able to share my PowerPoint, I've actually just posted a link into the chat box, which will take you directly to the NTPHN page, which illustrates this fantastic model. For those of you who'd like to have a look and who perhaps might be a little bit more visually, find the visual modality appealing, please go ahead and look at that as we talk through this project. So essentially, for those who don't know much about the National Suicide Prevention Trial, it was an initiative of the Commonwealth Government, which had identified 2 specific sites in Australia that would have a focus on Indigenous communities. So 2 out of 12 were Indigenous communities specifically focused. Here in Darwin, due to the nature of our very diverse Aboriginal community, it was identified that we would trial an approach to Indigenous suicide prevention in an urban setting. And then the other site, which had a focus on Aboriginal populations, was in the Kimberley region, and which had a more specific focus on regional remote areas. So as it is a trial, I guess it's important to recognise the timeline we've been working within. It was a 4-year period, and which aimed to include the development, implementation and evaluation of what would be a systemic approach to suicide prevention. The trial had a focus on the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander populations in Darwin, which include quite a vast makeup of different expressions, if you like, from traditional remote communities and cultural backgrounds to a high portion of stolen generation demographic and population here in Darwin, to also many other Aboriginal families who identified themselves as, I guess, being a little more contemporary in terms of their culture. So we had quite a diverse community that we aim to support and meet the needs of. The key, I guess, objective of the trial was to develop a systems approach. So importantly, was to recognise as a trial that it did have a timeline, and so we would the priority of the team in Darwin here were to speak to all the local local people in community. There was a strong emphasis on the lived experience and on our community elders who were essentially driving the community engagement process, which the BHN enabled to take place over a slightly longer period of time than usual commissioning or projects were. So that sense of time and genuine relationship building, as we've heard through other presentations, was absolutely key to this project. And the second task was to, I guess, recognise and identify where there were some critical gaps in the service delivery for suicide prevention here in the Darwin region. We listened to community inform the trial, and there was a range of different views, recognising that the early intervention space was so important, particularly for our younger people, but then also recognising that the really crisis point of care and intervention was such an important place where we had identified particular barriers and gaps in that space. We recognised that there was a range of different priority areas, such as men, such as young men, such as youth, such as LGBT. So with a range of, I guess, different but equally important priority groups, it emphasised the need to be far more systemic. So the team, throughout the engagement process, was able to really capture the values, the cultural values of the community, and then to really understand and analyse where some of the gaps were in the sector, and where perhaps there was some structural weakness across the sector here in Darwin. And it was identified that we had to come up with some, I guess, high-level sort of strategies that would either enhance the work in the space during the trial, but importantly after the trial. Another key objective of the trial was to engage in an activity of work that was going to be slightly unique, really exercising that community-driven led approach, and but importantly to start to build the evidence base, to start to recognise what works as a result of responding to communities' needs, and how can we further enhance and establish that evidence base to continue doing the work in that way. So just really quickly, I did touch on the community consultations, but as I said, the objectives were there for the community to share cultural views. It was recognised very quickly early in the piece that there was some quite distinct differences between an Aboriginal man or an Aboriginal young person or an Aboriginal elder's perspective on poor wellness and suicide prevention. And then there was, which was quite different to the values or the approach of the key principles in how perhaps a non-Aboriginal or sort of a mainstream approach to suicide prevention would be. So the task was then to develop a model that would capture both of the objectives of both of these different worldviews. I must say that across the 12 different sites in Australia, most of the other sites had identified gaps and then designed program areas based on the lifespan model, which is has seen fantastic activities across the nation. We're quite proud here that in the Darwin Northern Territory, guided by our working group, it was decided that the lifespan model would not capture some of those differences. And so there was a large period of time which was focused on how do we develop an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander-based suicide prevention model. Those of you who have visited the page would have seen this great illustration here, which was done by one of our local elders. I must acknowledge Uncle Tony Lee Duan, who had participated in community consultations and a whole series of them, and was able to capture that and illustrate that those conversations through the Strengthening Our Spirits model, which you will see there. Key findings of the consultations over this long period of time, which was that culture is central to wellness, and it was a central theme of community consultations or priorities for suicide prevention. There was this a strong emphasis on strengthening identity and spirit through improving social and emotional well-being. So very much looking at not only the biomedical factors or social determinants of mental health, but really that sense of identity. And what we heard a lot about was people describing a clash of cultural identity and not having that strong enough sense of identity as a fundamental, or as the foundation to positive social well-being. Recovering, and you could start to begin to see how these different key areas are interconnected. The third one is recovering from trauma and intergenerational trauma. which was viewed as an important critical aspect of intervention across any of the activities across the whole spectrum. Learning from the elders, cultural knowledge and lived experience, that was another key insight, and we believe that through our Indigenous leadership governance models, through our working group and through our high level of engagement with key stakeholders, we're able to continue to ensure that any of the programs that were designed would have that as central, but also importantly, any of the activities that organisations that would design would essentially fit within these strategy areas. The next one, building on opportunities for service providers to work in partnership. So that was an area that we found required a great deal of facilitation and support. And the next one was integrating those existing services. Okay. Excuse me, sorry about that. So returning back to the model. If we, for those of you who are able to view the model, what we can recognise here through the illustration is that there are 7 key strategy areas. These areas are, number 1, creating community wellbeing spaces. Number 2, facilitate connection to culture, land, language and law. Number 3, engaging cultural knowledge and lived experience. Number 4, embedding trauma-informed care. Number 5, delivering community-led initiatives. Number 6, training in early intervention and awareness. And number 7, facilitate innovation, collaboration and service integration. It was recognised that these strategies required an underpinning of principles from such as culture, local design or adaptation, building an evidence base, flexible and responsive, capacity building, and local workforce. Essentially, the outcomes of the consultation recognised that there was a story behind suicide prevention, and the story is reflected in the model, where we have 4 different elements of Aboriginal law. So we had fire, land and water. We recognised that this created the perfect system, and which sustained survival and life for Aboriginal people for so long, and that suicide and self-harm were not a part of the culture. It's recognised that there's a balance between fire, our spirit, land, mother, air, healing, and water, our identity. It was these different elements or aspects of our life that we were able to recognise as being important to strengthen the spirit of the individual. To summarise the Aboriginal narrative that was embedded throughout this model, it recognises that the stronger the fire burns, the more smoke it creates to heal us and to give us meaning. This is not just needed after a suicide or suicide attempt, but it's also healing from our shared story, trauma and detachment. The systems-based approach will aid in rebuilding our strength and resilience as a community and support our families' mental, physical and spiritual wellness. How this relates to the men. So after going through this period of consultation and strategy design, a range of different EOIs were put out into the community for organisations to think very, I guess, strategically and innovatively about what pockets of the community they had a level of engagement or access to, and then being guided by these key strategy areas and these principles. The PHN worked very hard with service providers to ensure that the Strengthening Our Spirits model was incorporated and embedded into everything that, every program that would be delivered. We did see a number of programs that expressions of interest which came to the PHN, which had a specific focus on youth or young or men, one specifically for young fathers. For this organisation, which I'm describing, that I have in mind, the Darwin Indigenous Men's Service, they had decided to, because they had such a large audience of men who were highly engaged on a weekly basis, they started to recognise that men are getting together and supporting each other in an informal basis, if you like, but how can we start to bridge in more education, more mental health literacy and more understanding of trauma-informed recovery? The men, through a co-design, really grassroots approach, had found the period of COVID-19 quite an advantage to them, because they were able to have so much more time to do a lot of outreach and smaller intimate group work, where they were able to capture as much feedback and guidance from all of the men who were a part of the service. So they've essentially now gone through their own period of program design, which is being underpinned by the Strengthening Our Spirits model, and informed by the conversations of the men. As we have recognised the many restrictions that have taken place, we've yet to see a number of our activities really kick off on the ground. There's been a lot of planning, a lot of design, and as I said, we've found that some service providers have welcomed that time. Again, emphasising that need for relationship building and for communication and for responding to the grassroots. So I'm not too sure how I'm going for time, but
yeah, you're over time. So
I thought so. Yes.
Okay. Good stuff. So if you could bring us home, Kim.
Yeah, sure. So some of the key messages, I guess the learning outcomes of the Strengthening Our Spirit approach is recognizing that if we were to perhaps focus in on one demographic and one group, one cohort, and deliver one activity, we recognize that it had a risk of not being sustained into the future and after the trial. We recognized that with the small investment that it wouldn't continue to provide a service in years and years to come. So we thought that by moving away from just one-off projects, it was really key to design a whole strategy that would trial a range of different projects and would hopefully continue the learning and the enriching process throughout that. I think the key message there was a systemic approach. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Having a look at a systemic approach and seeing how that relates to all of the different specific cohorts that we're approaching.
Great. That's excellent. Kim, I want to clap you both for the quality of the conversation, but also for dealing so well with whatever noises off you're dealing with.
Could you hear that? I've literally just had somebody knocking on my door, and only while I began my presentation. So knocking on the office door. So I've ignored them the whole time and stayed engaged in the presentation.
You really did a good job. Focus. I'm surprised they didn't get the message that you weren't in.
I was hoping that. My first visit all day, so.
Good. So yeah, well done. And yeah, thanks for, if you haven't already for any reason, just go and check out those links that Kim shared there. Couple of things. I just sort of snuck off for about 5 seconds. I didn't know you were going to mention the guys at the Darwin Indigenous Men's Shed. I was actually speaking to Jason Bonson this morning, and I just remembered that, and it's when I last saw you in July, that the last time I was there, I visited the
yes,
shed, which is more of a unit, right? It's more of a small unit on an industrial estate. But boy, what goes on there in terms of community building and the men that come through there and the support they get is fantastic. And the guys gifted me this one.
Wow. Hello?
Wonderful listening stick, which is a beautiful.
Yes.
Reminds me of the importance of listening, right?
Absolutely.
And that's the gift that they give to the men at the shed. But it's so something that runs through every single presentation. This afternoon is the whatever community is we're trying to serve, whether it's the veteran community, whether it's the LGBTQI plus community, whether it's your community in the Darling Downs, Naomi, or the Indigenous community. We need first to really listen to what those communities need. And then the other big message that I think all of your talks, the phrase commitment to community sort of really sticks out for me. And I think each and every one of you are demonstrating the absolute necessity of ongoing commitment to community, whether it's like Ray said about that long-term local grassroots up commitment to the veteran community, and that commitment from not just when our ADF forces that they're serving, but that commitment to keep them connected when they no longer serve. Aden, that level of commitment to the individual who's suicidal that doesn't begin and end at the "Are you okay?" conversation, that ongoing commitment, which isn't just about the one-to-one support that you provide, but it's also about building up all those relationships and connections at a local level to ensure that you get the right support for this person, rather than having one phone number or one service that you try and push everyone through. And Naomi, that clear commitment to involving your community and finding out what they want and then developing responses based on what they say is needed and keeping them involved on an ongoing basis. And to circle back to Kim's talk, set aside the commitment of delivering a talk whilst whatever else is happening around him, which was outstanding. That real commitment to properly understand the community, and even going, we need a model for this community, and we need and it's a bit of a cliche now, but it's really worth reinforcing. It's not community, it's communities, whether that's, you know, the communities that Aden works with, LGBTQI+, whether it's, you know, different communities of men, different indigenous communities, ages, backgrounds, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I really heard in all your talks a willingness to listen, a commitment to listening, and a commitment to the communities that you serve. And I want to circle back to each of the speakers now. And I don't necessarily have a question. I just want to give you the opportunity to share your thoughts as we move towards the end of this session, based on what you've shared and what you've heard from the other speakers, starting with Ray.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. You know, I've found it, as always with these things, it's really interesting to hear what others are doing. And it's interesting, the challenges are, in one sense, really diverse and different, but in another sense, they're quite similar. Geographically, we're kind of dispersed in this very big nation. We have different cohorts of, you know, people. Those 12 national sites looked at different cohorts, including men, Indigenous people, you know, Indigenous brothers and sisters, youth, farmers, veterans, etc. In the end, we're all human beings, and it's interesting. We've got this kind of a fairly, and as kind of Lyndall pointed out, a really complex approach to a systems approach. In the end, some of the most effective things are delivered by passionate individuals with a great knowledge of their own community. So, you know, to me, what I've got out of the day is inspiration from others. And I think there's incredible work going on here, but even in each of those microcosms, we'll have greater strength when we collaborate together. And certainly that's what's occurred in our community. You know, between our veterans, our LGBTIQ, farmers, you know, Indigenous brothers and sisters, Townsville Suicide Prevention Network, working together collaboratively, we can learn a lot. One of the criticisms of the 12 national trials for a while was we're doing all this great work, but it was difficult to see what the others were doing. Okay, but what really strikes me is the incredible work going on in individual communities. And really, one or two good men, or one or two good women, or one or two good people can do incredible things. That's all.
That's great, Ray. Thank you. And I think for me, today has been about, yes, facilitating that working together conversation, but also just simply putting a male suicide lens on it as well. And I hope that extra lens has been useful and beneficial. I've certainly found it really enlightening. Aden, I'll come back to you for some final thoughts.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks everyone for your presentations. I think too, you know, that what you said in relation to the highlighting sort of community, and I think the importance of community connection really sits with me. I think sometimes even when, I guess if I use the LGBTIQ community specifically, is I think sometimes we do really see change, we see it occurring, and we see that in the community. You know, we see lots of organisations, we see Pride March, we see a lot more acceptance, etc. But still, for me personally, every day I work with those people that are still in the shadows. So for me, it's about highlighting that, yes, we are creating change, etc. But we need to hear people, and we need to, you know, not necessarily put them into a box that works for us. We actually have to, I know, in some way, lose the stereotypes or labels that we use to allow us to actually understand that we're all connected and that we're all a part of the community. And yeah, at the end of the day, we all cope differently. And you know, if we take away the word mental health, we all have emotional well-being, and that's what, you know, I think from everyone else's presentations, etc., and everyone's different paths, is that, you know, at the end of the day, people just want to be heard. And I still feel sometimes, at times, some people aren't. And I think that's something that we all sort of need to continue working on, to continue creating that change.
Right. Thanks, Aden. Beautifully
Thank
put.
you.
Thanks for being here today. And Naomi.
I guess just some final thoughts is really the importance of collaboration and really working collectively across the spectrum of stepped care and mental health to ensure, I guess, that we're using the finite resources in the most effective ways, that we aren't letting people fall through gaps, that we are not reinventing the wheel or duplicating, but that we're all coming together and trying to create a really seamless approach to services. And that I think the importance and recognition for lived experience in the design of what services we offer to the community is just so invaluable. Yeah, I think that there's just a lot that we can learn from being more educated and being more compassionate, and just seeking input from the people in the community is probably the most important thing. Like, you can look at statistics and you can look at data, but until you hear from people on the ground about what it is that's going to be useful to them and helpful to them, and perhaps too just really truly understanding what the barriers that they're experiencing and help seeking are to be, that's when I think you can offer something that's meaningful, and you can offer something that's more effective. There's no point throwing these great programs out into our community if they're not what the community is seeking or is looking for. They're just not going to be utilised. They're not going to be effective. So yeah, I think it's just really valuing the voice of the people within our community when we're commissioning anything.
Great. Well wrapped up. Thank you. And Kim, I don't know if you're available to speak, but if you are.
Yep.
Any final thoughts? Yeah, I've got you, Kim. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So I think what we can all recognise is that there has been a very strong consensus coming through from all of the different participants today, and this priority for the voice of the people and the voice of the community, that community-driven and owned approach is as being essentially the most important aspect. And I think it brings our, it makes me curious, or it brings my next train of thought to then go, well, then how is that? Why is that potentially so difficult? Why is it so difficult? And it does recognise that as individuals, whether we have different ethnic backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, we all uniquely have a particular worldview, and a particular worldview around our health, around the needs of men, around the best approaches and effective practices for men, to keep it relevant to this context. But we all, each and every single one of us, have our own different beliefs and thoughts and attitudes about something. And often we don't recognize when we're designing a program, when we're developing a program, often we don't recognize how much of our own perceptions really underpin that. And I think what I hope that the Strengthening Our Spirits model has reflected is that well-being and intervention and healing needs to be an emergent property. It needs to come from the community. The Strengthening Our Spirits model was never intended to be explicit. It was never intended to be prescriptive. So the approach and the key message here is, how do we build a scaffold, or how do we scaffold a framework which can be tailored to any specific community or cohort, and allow that group approach and design and intervention activity to emerge, be an emergent property rather than something that we've described as being the key area. So I think in terms of best practice, wherever we look around Australia, I think we should be thinking about how do we build scaffolds and frameworks for any one community organisation who might be focused at any different areas of the spectrum, whether it's early intervention, whether it's crisis care, whether it's addressing some of the social determinants. How do we provide a framework that's going to essentially guide that individual? And and the second thing it makes me think about is cultural competence and cultural intelligence. How do we, as the PHN has always aimed to achieve with this project, how do we create something that isn't the basis of PHN thinking, but is something that is the basis of the Darwin community's thinking, whomever that organisation specifically aims to service? And I think that was quite a dynamic process in itself. It's one that cannot be achieved overnight, or isn't a skill set or a toolbox as such. It's very much a dynamic process of evolving relationships. And so I think that was really key for us to understand whenever we're working out in the field, is that our relationships are going to be what underpin that emergent property. When that community is able to be self-determined and say, these are what our needs are, and these are how we want to achieve that, or whether the message that's being communicated to them is that there's another way to fix it, and that perhaps that they don't have agency and control and authority over their life. So I think these are really important messages that I've just heard reflected through all the presentations. So yeah, I'm in very good company, and I'm grateful. Thank you.
That's great, Kim. Lovely way to bring the conversation to a close, and to reflect back across today. That piece about sort of like, agency and self-determination and self-empowerment, if you apply that broadly to all communities of men, I think in the second session today, when we were talking about projects that have been commissioned by PHNs, we saw some really good examples of men who are clearly empowered to take action for their communities by the PHNs. And in the first session, we were looking at how can PHNs engage more effectively with men. Well, it came from that process. When PHNs go through the process of first identifying the men they want to engage with, that creates the foundation for empowering the men. So it wasn't kind of designed that way necessarily, but I think there's a nice sort of follow through throughout the day. There's one of the key things that's emerging for me is, whilst there are complex problem, multiple solutions, but there's very clearly a massive role to be played by building strong relationships at a local level between the health system, however it manifests, in this case PHNs, and the communities they serve. And it's that overlap that I'm really interested in, because the better we get that overlap, the more effective we become. And today has been about, I hope, a little bit of overlapping between different PHNs, between PHNs and some of the men's health sector, and most importantly between lots of great individuals, the types of individuals who are prepared to spend a day sitting on a computer talking about male suicide prevention. You are extraordinary human beings to do that. So we've come officially to the end of this session. I want to thank each of our speakers this afternoon. It's been fantastic, each and every one of you. Ray, Aden, Naomi and Kim. Thank you so much. Virtual claps and all that kind of thing coming to you. I've posted a survey link in, this is for the whole day, I've posted a survey link in the chat box. If any of you attendees have got time to have a look at that, that'll be great. We welcome feedback. We'll also send the link out by email tomorrow if you haven't got time to do it.